Today we're going to work on graphing inequalities and solving the one-step inequalities. So the first problem we want to look at is negative 4m is greater than or equal to negative 4. Our first order of business is to solve this. We need to find what m equals. So we're going to isolate our variable down the middle of our equation. This is an inequality equation because we see the greater than or equal to sign. You have to remember when your coefficient, and this is our coefficient, the negative 4, when our coefficient is negative, we always flip our inequality sign. Negative 4 and m are multiplying, so the inverse operation is to divide by negative 4 on both sides. When you divide negative 4 by negative 4, we will be left with m. And because we had a negative coefficient, remember, the letter and the number next to each other are multiplying, and the coefficient is the number in front of the variable. So that negative 4 tells us we have to flip our sign. So instead of greater than or equal to, it's going to be less than or equal to. Then you need to figure out your division problem. Remember reading it down. Negative 4 goes in the house, that's our dividend. And negative 4 goes as our divisor as well, because that's our denominator and our divisor. A negative times a positive is a negative, and 4 goes into 4 one time. So our answer for this problem will be m is less than or equal to 1. Now to graph this inequality, the first thing you need to do is draw yourself a number line. Your number line, remember, has arrows at both ends because number lines continue in both directions. You could place a 0, a 1, and a 2, and a negative 1 and a negative 2. And when you graph inequalities, when it includes the number, in other words, when you have less than or equal to or greater than or equal to, that includes a closed dot. It includes the number, so we want to do an enclosed dot. So over the number 1, we will put a dot and color it in. And m is less than or equal to, and the arrow is pointing to your left, so that's the direction your arrow should go. Okay, let's continue on, and I want you to practice. I'm going to write out negative 4r is greater than 16. Go ahead and pause the recording and do it at your seat now. You must remember, this is your coefficient. If the coefficient is negative, if it's negative, you're going to end up flipping your sign. So make sure you do that when you do this problem. Now to solve this problem, the first thing you need to do is make sure you recognize that it has a negative coefficient. We want to isolate our variable by doing the inverse operation. Negative 4 and r are multiplying, so the inverse operation is to divide by that negative 4 to get it away from our r. When you divide negative 4 by negative 4, you get 1, so you're going to be left with r. Remembering that you had a negative coefficient, you need to flip your symbol. It is no longer greater than, it's less than. And then you can go over to the side and do your math. 16 divided by negative 4. A negative times a negative equals a positive. 4 goes into 16 4 times, which will equal 16. So our answer should be r is less than negative 4. To graph that on a number line, you could make a number line very simply. I always start off with the number I'm trying to do in the middle, and I have negative 4. On this side, we would have negative 3. On this side, we would have negative 5. Because this is a less than symbol at negative 4, we are going to have an open circle, and less than means go to the left. Now remember, what we had to do is flip our inequality symbol. In order to flip our inequality symbol, we need to make sure that we are looking at the right thing. This is our inequality symbol. When you have a negative coefficient, because that's a negative 4, That's why we flipped that around and made it from greater than to less than. The reason that it went left on the number line is because this symbol is pointing to the left, or meaning less than. So now we can also work using fractions. When we use fractions, for example, x divided by 5 is less than or equal to negative 3/5. We have fractions involved here as well as integer rules we have to worry about. But we have to look at the equation as what is it doing? Well, here's the middle of my inequality, and I know that the x over 5 is dividing, so the opposite would be to multiply both sides of my equation by 5. If you want to think of 5 as 5 over 1 and cross cancel those out, you will be left with x is less than or equal to, and then you have some math to do. When you have this math to do, you need to focus on what it says. It says negative 3/5 times 5. Well, we know that when you have a whole number, you need to place a 1 under it to multiply, and you multiply straight across. When you multiply a negative times a positive, you will get a negative. When you multiply 3 times 5, you get 15. And when you multiply 5 times 1, you get 5. We never, ever, ever, ever leave a fraction unreduced or improper. So you could reduce 15 over 5 because it's improper. You'll divide. 15 divided by 5 is 3. So your answer for this problem will be negative 3. To graph that, you could draw your number line in. I always start with my middle number is negative 3. Over here will be negative 2 and negative 1. Negative 4 and negative 5 getting smaller. I know it's a closed circle. It's a closed circle because we have the symbol less than or equal to. So at negative 3, we're going to fill in our circle, and the arrow is pointing to the less than side. So to review, when we flip our symbol, let's remember that if you have a negative coefficient, in this case, 3 is a negative, so you would flip in this case. If you have negative 3/5 m, that fraction is negative, so you would flip. If you have negative 2.1 or negative 2 1/10 m, you would also flip this one because your coefficient, which is the number in front of the variable, is a negative. If for some reason you had just 3m and it's positive, you do not flip this because your coefficient is a positive. If you had 3/5 m, again, when you have a positive coefficient, you do not flip. If you had positive 2 1/10 m, again, positive coefficient, you do not flip. Okay, son, let me give you a problem and I want to see how you solve it. Let's have 14v is less than or equal to 14. Remember, this is a multiplication problem because the 14 and the v are next to each other, but it is not a negative. So in this case, you would not flip it. Go ahead and push pause and go ahead and solve your problem. Okay, so to solve this problem, we know that we have a coefficient involved. There is a coefficient of 14, but it's a positive coefficient, so we know automatically we just have to solve this. We don't have to do any flipping. To solve a multiplication problem, we divide both sides of our equation by the coefficient, which is 14. 14 divided by 14 is 1, so we will be left with v is less than or equal to 14 divided by 14, or any number over itself equals 1. So in this case, v is less than or equal to 1. When we graph that solution, again, we draw a number line, we put a 1 in, we know that 2 comes next to it, 0 comes on this side. We know it's going to be a closed circle because we have an equal symbol. So we're going to close our circle up, and the arrow is pointing to less than. So our arrow will go towards the left. So in this case, we had the question of, do we flip it for an addition problem? Well, in this case, what is the coefficient of v right now? The coefficient for v is a 1. Because remember, we don't put anything if it's a 1. And that's a positive 1. So we don't have any flipping and we have no coefficient to worry about. There is no multiplying in this problem. So in this case, you would not flip it. You would just solve it. Okay, let's try one more problem before this session. Let's try one where we have another negative coefficient. We have negative 10x is less than negative 80. We know that right now that is a multiplication problem, so we're going to divide on both sides of the inequality. The coefficient for this problem, because of its multiplying, is negative 10. Because it's negative 10, we know automatically we have to flip the symbol in the answer. We're dividing both sides by negative 10. Negative 10 divided by negative 10 will equal x. Again, because we had that negative coefficient right here, it's telling us we need to flip our symbol from less than to greater than. Then you can come to the side and do your math to make sure you do it correctly. You have negative 80 divided by negative 10. A negative times a positive makes a negative, and 10 goes into 80 8 times. So our answer here is x is greater than 8. To draw your number line to graph that solution, you could put 8 inside. Remember to make your number line correctly. Going to the left is always less. Going to the right is always greater. So we have an open circle at 8 because we don't have an equal symbol under our greater than sign, and the arrow is pointing to the greater side. So any solution greater than 8 will make this equation true. To check this equation, I'd like to go one more step further and to replace that x with something that's greater than. Well, if I replace that x with 9, that would say 9 is greater than 8. And that is a true statement, so we know that that arrow is going the right way. If for some reason we wanted to try another one, we could replace it with 10. Well, is 10 greater than 8? Yes, it is, so it is a solution and our arrow's going the right way. That's how you can check it on a test. You can replace your variable with one of the numbers that's in your arrow space. Let's try, for example, to try another one where the arrow is not. Let's try 6 in for x. Is 6 greater than 8? It is not. That's why our arrow goes the other direction.